A local man is missing on the Pacific Crest Trail.
I just want to go find him.
That was Kris Fowler's mother. Kris Fowler grew up in Beaver Creek and graduated from Beaver Creek High School back in 2000. He's been hiking the Pacific Crest Trail since last May and had been keeping friends and family updated via social media. But Fowler has not been heard from since October 12th, nearly 3 weeks ago.
The deal was every 2 weeks, but he would go no longer than 3. He would at least post something on Facebook, send a text to me, his dad, or call us or other friends. But he has been in communication the whole time. So there's something wrong, and the locals there think something's really wrong too.
Well, according to those who last saw him, Fowler was heading to the Snoqualmie Pass. It has rough terrain and is partially covered in snow.
The search for a missing hiker in the hills north of Warner Springs has been suspended for the weekend because of that bad weather that Pat was talking about. 10 News reporter Steve Theorina was up on the mountain today, is now live at Santa Isabel. And Steve, that weather really caused problems for search crews.
Certainly did, and would continue to do so. Cold and windy, rain and snow coming in. It's just not safe for the searchers up there, despite their expertise and their cold weather gear. They came down off the mountain without finding the hiker. The last minutes of a search that began Tuesday for missing hiker Kris Sylvia, who was supposed to meet a friend at this Buddhist temple near Warner Springs. He never showed.
Hello friends. In this video, we're going to be talking about the disturbing Pacific Crest Trail disappearances and deaths. Pacific Crest Trail, commonly referred to as the PCT, remains an iconic trail, passing through California, Oregon, and Washington. Several hundred hikers attempt the entire 2,653-mile trek each year, and many complete the trip without incident. However, in recent years, there have been some high-profile disappearances and deaths. Only about 60% of the 700 to 800 who start the trail actually finish. For the average hiker, it takes around 5 months to complete the through hike. Although there are some elite athletes who have finished the trail in as little as 2 months. The Pacific Crest Trail, officially designated as the Pacific Crest National Scenic Trail, is 263 miles long and is aligned with the highest portions of the Cascade and Sierra Nevada mountain ranges. For the most part, it's located within 100 to 150 miles east of the U.S. Pacific coastline. The trail's southern end is just south of Campo, California by the U.S. border with Mexico, and its northern terminus is on the Canada-U.S. border at the edge of Manning Park in British Columbia. PCT ranges in elevation from just above sea level at the Oregon-Washington border to 13,153 feet at Forster Pass in the Sierra Nevadas. The route passes through 25 national forests and 7 national parks. Its midpoint is near Chester, California, close to Mount Lassen, where the Sierra and Cascade mountain ranges meet. It was designated a National Scenic Trail in 1968, although it was not officially completed until 1993. Pacific Crest Trail was conceived by Clifton Churchill Clark in 1932. It received official status under the National Trail System Act of 1968 and is also part of the 6,875-mile Great Western Loop. Famous sections include the John Muir Trail, Sonora Pass, Sky Lakes Wilderness, Donner Pass, and Badger Flat to Little Willow Lake in the Lassen Volcanic National Park. First, let's talk about disappearances along the Pacific Crest Trail. Since 2016, there have been several high-profile disappearances on the PCT. Were they just misadventure caused by hypothermia or accidents? The cases of Kris Fowler, David O'Sullivan, and Kris Sylvia reminds us of the dangers on some parts of the trail, especially in the colder months of the year. First up, David O'Sullivan. David disappeared April 7, 2017. 25-year-old Irishman, David O'Sullivan planned a 5-month hike on the PCT in April of 2017. He left Middleton, County Cork, Ireland on March 20th, but sadly, David never returned to his home country. A novice hiker, he started in Campo on March 22nd and had planned hiking the entire PCT from the border with Mexico to that with Canada. His trail name was Leprechaun. David spent a lot of time preparing for his trip, regularly tackling Cara Hill, the highest peak in Ireland, at 1,038.6 meters, carrying weights, and he also transformed his parents' garage into a mini gym. Having completed a media course as well as a degree in English and philosophy at the University College Cork, David saved money from his job working in a local garage in Middleton to fund his trip. He was inspired to walk the PCT, having read the book Wild, which also became a film starring Reese Witherspoon. O'Sullivan is described as 5 feet 10 inches tall, weighed 154 pounds, has brown hair, blue eyes, wears glasses, and has a heavy Irish accent. He had been hiking for 2.5 weeks when he found himself in Idlewild, a small mountain town at the foot of the San Jacinto Mountain on April 5th. Idlewild is a popular holiday spot, and he spent the night at the Idlewild Inn, a family-owned accommodation. His mom, Carmel, spoke about the last time he was seen. He arrived into this little town on the 5th called Idlewild. It's about halfway up the mountain, 2.5 weeks into his hike. He did a few chores, got in touch with all his friends on Facebook, and contacted us. Everything was going fine. And he was leaving on the morning of the 7th, and he's not been heard of or seen since. Correspondence with his family indicates that David had plans to hike on the morning of the 7th. He had been waiting for an adapter for his Kindle to arrive at the post office and was considering waiting until it opened until he set off the next day, but he was concerned that it might interfere with his schedule. It is not known whether he tried to pick up the adapter or not, but it is certain he never received it, as it ended up back at the retailer. An email he sent on that very same morning will be the last communication that David ever made. There was unusual weather on the San Jacinto Mountain that year, with an unusual amount of snow for so early in the season. There are numerous trails up the mountain, with Devil's Slide being by far the most popular, but just one day before David was last seen, a hiker reported getting a mile into the trail before encountering snow and turning back. Now, David had no alpine experience, but he had told other hikers he had no intention of hiking the snow, and he did not buy any snow equipment prior to his journey. He did make a $70 purchase at the local outdoor store Nomads, but the item was not registered on their point of sale. According to the store, all their snow equipment would have been listed on their receipt. David was also using a half-mile map, a brand specifically created for the Pacific Coast Trail. The map advised hikers to hike up Black Mountain Road when snow was present in order to avoid the most dangerous part of the terrain. David had been working hard at a garage and saved for a year to go on his Pacific Crest adventure. He visited an ATM before he set off up the mountain, but only withdrew enough to buy more food at the next stop. A sizable amount was left in his account and has not been touched since that final transaction. At home, David's mother Carmel and father Con were becoming increasingly concerned. David had warned them that there would be periods of several weeks where he would not be able to get in touch, but feeling that something was wrong, his parents went ahead and contacted the Pacific Crest Trail Association in April. They were told to sit tight and wait to see if David turned up. He had arranged to meet a friend in Santa Barbara in May, but he never arrived. Carmel and Con called the PCT Association back once again, only to be told that they were not a babysitting service and that there was nothing they could do. As a result, David was not officially reported missing until June 30th, 12 weeks after he had last been seen. A massive search was launched in Whitewater Preserve, an area just north of the San Jacinto Mountains, which would have been en route to David's next scheduled stop. Yet, despite the use of helicopters, dogs, and ATVs, search and rescue team came up short. With no evidence of foul play, there has been little in the way of official investigation since then. Several hikers have called in eyewitness statements thinking they may have seen David at some point on the trail, but none of these sightings has been positively confirmed, with most vaguely referring to a hiker with an accent. It has since become known that there was a German man who bears a striking resemblance to David on the trail at the same time, and it's possible that some people may have confused the two. In December 2017, an aerial survey was conducted over Idlewild. The pilot, Gus Calderon, and mission specialist Richard McRae overflew 88 square miles of both mountain face and deep desert, taking over 1,000 photographs of the ground below. Volunteers analyzed those images in great detail, looking for signs of David's blue backpack. Gus and Richard used software supplied by Aero Scientific to conduct the survey. Aero Scientific's flight planning software, known as Flight Planner, and flight management system, known as Avitrix, were used to plan the flight runs over Idlewild and manage the camera system throughout the flight. The aerial survey successfully acquired 1,235 color images of the area at 4-inch resolution. On a regular basis, volunteers, largely from San Diego's Irish community, still scour the mountain on foot and on horses, looking for any signs of David. Drones have been flown over, grid by grid, while people on the ground examine thousands of images for any clues. At the time of this recording, David is still missing. Next, we have the case of Kris Fowler, who disappeared October 12, 2016. 34-year-old Kris Fowler, trail name Sherpa, was completing his NOBO, or northbound, through hike in Washington on the Pacific Crest Trail. On October 12, 2016, he was dropped off near the trailhead at White Pass, Packwood, where he grabbed a coffee before he headed toward the Canadian border to complete the last 366 miles of his hike. Unfortunately, that was the last time he was ever seen alive. His last cell phone ping was in that area near White Pass around 5 p.m. Considerable amounts of snow and freezing rain fell over the next few days. Authorities and volunteers searched much of the trail between White Pass and the Canadian border, yet no sign of Kris was found. While official search and rescue teams under the Yakima Sheriff's Department did an initial search along the PCT from White Pass, in addition to flyovers and road searches, after the initial search, they focused primarily on the area surrounding Blowout Mountain, the location of an unconfirmed sighting by 2 bear hunters on October 22nd. 3 years later, in 2019, Yakima County search and rescue volunteers again conducted multiple searches, led by Sergeant Randy Briscoe. Fowler said another 15 to 20 volunteers form what she calls her team behind the scenes, a coordinated effort dedicated to combing through the areas they know well. But again, nothing was found. Given the severity of the storm, had Kris had made it to Highway 410 at Chinook Pass, 28 miles from where he started at White Pass, he could have pulled out and sought refuge in town, albeit very cold, wet, and tired, as all hikers were that bailed off-trail during that storm. Since he didn't do so, though, it's believed he went off-trail somewhere between White Pass and Chinook Pass, 28-mile section. How far off-trail is the question. Some consider any sightings from mid-October or later in any search areas north of Chinook Pass, like Blowout Mountain, to be bogus. Did Kris just succumb to hypothermia on the PCT that October? As of this recording, we have no answers. Next, we have Christopher Stephen Sylvia. He disappeared February 16, 2015, from Warner Springs, California. Chris Sylvia was hiking southbound on the PCT from Anza to Campo. He started his trek near State Route 74 in Anza on February 12, 2015, and planned to hike for at least a week before contacting his friends to pick him up. On February 16th, he called a friend and asked to be picked up the next day at the Buddhist temple on Chihuahua Valley Road. Sylvia's roommate went to the designated spot at the agreed-upon time, but Sylvia never showed up. At first, his roommate just assumed he had decided not to go to the temple after all. Search teams from Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties searched in vain for 4 days, before bad weather forced them to suspend the search and rescue operation. On February 20th, another hiker found Sylvia's gear, including identification, sleeping bag, and backpack, laid out alongside the Pacific Crest Trail near mile marker 127, not far from Mike's place. Despite a large search effort, Sylvia was never heard from again. Kris was described as an experienced outdoorsman, and his mother stated it would be uncharacteristic for him to go hiking alone or to leave his gear behind. When he disappeared, he was known to be wearing a dark-colored fleece jacket, green camouflage print pants, and brown and black hiking boots. He had brown hair, hazel eyes, a mustache, a tattoo of Asian symbols on his side, and a goatee at the time of his disappearance. Now, let's talk about deaths on the Pacific Crest Trail. There are relatively few reported deaths on the PCT through hikes, considering the number of hikers, and the main causes of death are heat exhaustion, falls, and drowning due to either misadventures or just pure bad luck. There have been 19 reported deaths on the Pacific Coast Trail since 1983. However, that number is believed to be much higher. Here are some of their stories. Gerald Duran and Jody Zatchik. Since its formation in 1977, there's been only one known attempt to hike the PCT in winter by the couple Gerald Duran and Jody Zatchik in 1983. They were traveling south to north and were hiking towards Wrightwood, California to resupply when they got lost. They had started down the wrong canyon and ended up on much steeper terrain than their planned Acorn Trail route. As they were climbing down, they slipped on ice and fell several hundred feet off a cliff to their deaths. Flicka and Jane Rodman. On Sunday, November 19, 1995, Jane and Flicka Rodman, two young, long-distance hikers from Worcester, Mass., were killed near Pear Blossom. The couple had started their Pacific Crest Trail through hike at the Canadian border in July and hiked south, allowing this year's unusually heavy Sierra snows to melt ahead of their arrival. They left the trail, apparently trying to catch up with another southbound couple who were a few days ahead of them. While walking eastward on a path along Highway 138, some distance from the trail itself, they were struck and killed by a driver who lost control of his vehicle after falling asleep at the wheel. John Lauder. Dr. John Lauder, 69, a doctor from San Diego, was hiking the Pacific Crest Trail all the way from East San Diego County to Canada when he was found dead June 5, 1999, near Lone Pine. He was an able and experienced hiker and had begun his hike on April 23rd at Boulder Oaks, where the Pacific Crest Trail crosses Old Highway 80. He had hoped to complete the through hike by October. With a snowstorm expected, Dr. Lauder had separated from his hiking group as he was struggling to keep up with them. He decided to hike down the mountain, but as the ice storm hit, his vision became impaired. He tripped or slid on ice and fell about 60 feet from a cliff into a canyon. Despite breaking one arm and both legs, Dr. Lauder survived the fall and was able to crawl into his sleeping bag. But his injuries were just too much, and by the time hikers reached him the next day, he had perished. He broke his own rule, never hike alone, said his former wife, Ida Lauder. John Joseph Donovan. John Joseph Donovan, 59, was hiking near Southern California's Mount San Jacinto on May 6, 2005. That day, a blizzard dropped 8 inches of snow on the area, and he was trapped on the mountain. Now, John was a veteran hiker who was notoriously bad navigator and reckless with it. He had strayed from the Pacific Crest Trail, which he was through hiking, carried no compass and no useful maps, nor a GPS or anything that would help him. All he had instead was a tarp for a tent, socks in place of gloves, and he had a few provisions. He always traveled ultralight, like this as he called it, so if things went wrong, he was in trouble fast. He was an active member of the Old Dominion and Tidewater Appalachian Trail Clubs, and had just retired from 20 years as a licensed clinical social worker with Central State Hospital. Additionally, he served 15 years in the United States Navy. Around 1 p.m. on May 3rd, he climbed into Little Taquits Valley, just south of Saddle Junction, and found that trail was now concealed by snow. John sought help from 2 other hikers, a Canadian nurse named Connie Davis, age 46, and her 21-year-old son, Alex, both of whom had extensive altitude experience. When Donovan began following the Davis through the snowfield, Connie told him, "We're not going to take the most direct route." He stayed about 30 feet behind them and he put on crampons, but the spikes didn't work well with his lightweight trail runners, and he slipped and fell repeatedly. Eventually, Connie and Alex followed a small creek uphill and turned northwest roughly half a mile south of Saddle Junction. "That's where we saw him last," Connie Davis wrote later in a letter to the PCT community. It was about 8,080 feet on the afternoon of May 3rd. That was the last time Donovan was seen alive. 12 days passed before anyone realized he was missing. Many hikers believe that Donovan headed toward Fuller Ridge and then froze to death in the blizzard on San Jacinto's west side, near Saddle Junction. On Memorial Day weekend, 2005, Riverside County Rescue Unit personnel combed the area with dogs. After 2 days with no clues, the authorities called off the search for good. Apparently, after leaving the Davises on May 3rd, Donovan had tried to detour west down into Idlewild, but with no way to navigate, he became disoriented. In a journal written in the margins of photocopied guidebook pages, Donovan scribbled, "Couldn't find the trail to Idlewild." So instead, he cut away from Idlewild, drawn by the lights of much larger Palm Springs. Traveling about 3 miles northeast from the Saddle Junction area that night, he crossed Skinny Willow Creek, then climbed a small ridge and plunged down into a steep gash called Hidden Valley. Donovan's journal places him in Long Valley at about 4,300 feet on the night of May 3rd. On May 5th, still camped in the same ravine, he took a fall. How badly he was hurt is unclear, as Donovan didn't write detailed notes. He simply wrote that he had already become too weak to climb up out of the canyon. He tried to signal for help and built a few weak fires that quickly smoldered out, but no one spotted him. A 100-foot waterfall lay directly below, and the canyon's walls were virtually sheer. He was boxed in, and he likely knew it would be days, maybe a week or more, before anyone even noticed he was missing. At one point on May 5, Donovan took an inventory of his supplies. He was down to 12 cheese crackers. In his last entry, dated May 14th, he scribbled that he was going down to Long Creek for water. "Goodbye, and love you all," he wrote. Donovan's remains were eventually discovered by a 20-foot waterfall in a pool amid birches and mossy green rocks in May of 2006. Brandon Day, 28, and Gina Allen, 24, of Dallas, were found in May 2006 after spending 3 nights in the San Jacinto wilderness. The third night, they came across a backpack of supplies at a deserted campsite. Donovan's remains were found near this camp. Day and Allen were visiting the desert east of Los Angeles for a convention when they wandered off a mountain trail during a 2-hour stop with other tourists. Only prepared for a brief hike, they wore light windbreakers and tennis shoes and had no food, spare clothing, or cell phones. At first, they were not too worried because they could hear voices. "I still felt we were relatively close," Day said, recalling he thought the trail would be around the next boulder. With night closing in, they took shelter in a small cave between boulders and spent the night sleepless, freezing, and hungry. In the morning, they struggled to follow a stream downhill through boulder-strewn terrain. They decided to keep going with the mantra from night 1, "We're going to get out of here. We're not going to die. It's not our time," Day said. The couple found items that Donovan had left behind in a dead-end gorge on Monday, May 8, 2016. This included a warm sweater, foam sleeping mat, poncho, backpack, disposable razor, spoon, dry socks, and matches that the couple used to light a signal fire. Day and Allen were elated, thinking someone there could help them find their way out. But something was wrong. The gear was wet. A radio and flashlight were corroded. They realized the camp was deserted. They found identification showing that the pack belonged to Donovan, who had vanished a year earlier. His last journal entry was 1 year ago to the day that we found it, which was very eerie, Day said. Nobody knew where he was. Nobody knew to come looking for him. So he was preparing for the end. We were looking at the words of a man who was passing. They were rescued after the flames from the fire were seen from a helicopter. The whole acre or two caught fire, created a really big smoke signal that finally alerted a helicopter crew. Even in his death, he was helping people, Donovan's longtime friend Chris Hook of Richmond, Virginia, said at the time. The couple said they had a real special thanks for Donovan. Next up, No Way Ray Eccles. On May 15, 2006, Wendell Ray Eccles, known as No Way Ray, of Mariposa, California, was approximately 300 miles into a northbound PCT thru hike with his wife Alice Tulloch when he apparently lost his footing and fell about 200 feet to his death. Alice was hiking about 20 yards behind him when he went around a corner and disappeared. The accident occurred in a remote part of the San Bernardino National Forest near Deep Creek. Another group of hikers heard Alice's pleas for help and were able to use a satellite phone to call for assistance. Unfortunately, Ray was pronounced dead at the scene. Before his retirement, Ray worked as a junior high school teacher in a 4-room, 9-grade country school in the Mariposa County Unified School District. He was best known in the hiking community, however, for his frequent posts to the PCTL, his service on the American Long Distance Hiking Association West Board of Directors, his participation in events such as Trail Fest and the annual Day Zero kickoff party, as well as his inspired writing. Adrian Everett Tracy Allison. 20-year-old Adrian Everett Tracy Allison died August 20th, 2013, while free climbing a rock face with friends near the Pacific Crest Trail in Yakima County when he fell to his death. He attended schools in Auburn and graduated from Bonnie Lake High School in 2011, where he was an active member of the school band and an avid music enthusiast. Timothy Evan Nodal. On April 24, 2014, near Lake Morena, California, Tim Nodal, 19, began to feel unwell, and he called his stepfather for help, who then called 911. He was hiking with a friend in the Cleveland National Forest in temperatures between 72 and 80 degrees. When firefighters got to the camping area around 1:30 p.m., they were talking with the teenager and going over his symptoms. He said he wasn't feeling good and then suddenly went into cardiac arrest. Tim was pronounced dead at 2:23 p.m. However, oddly enough, there was no evidence of dehydration, alcohol, or substance abuse, according to the coroner's report. Dawson Johnson. Dawson Johnson, a 75-year-old hiker from Redwater, Texas, hiked to the Mount Whitney summit on Tuesday, July 29, 2014, but failed to return to his campsite at Crabtree Meadow. His wife reported missing, and later his body was spotted on the north side of Mount Whitney, where he apparently had fallen and died. Philip Crosby. On December 11, 2014, 40-year-old Philip Crosby was camping with his son along the Pacific Crest Trail when a tree fell due to high winds in the area. The falling tree, of 8 to 10 inches in diameter, hit their tent and partially struck his father across the arm and chest. His son, Alex Crosby, called 911 and told dispatch his father was complaining of difficulty breathing. A short time later, the elder man succumbed to his injuries. The Crosbys, formerly of Sunny Valley, were homeless at the time and were en route to a destination in Arizona. No other information is available regarding this case. Marvin Novo. On May 29, 2017, in the Mission Creek Preserve area of California, Marvin Novo's body was discovered along the West Fork Trail. He was 58 years old and died while hiking near Whitewater Preserve. He had been planning his Pacific Crest Trail thru hike for at least a decade. It's suspected that his death was heat-related. Rika Morita. Rika Strawberry Morita came to the Pacific Crest Trail from Japan to thru hike. She was 32 and lived in Osaka. She was hiking alone and was reported missing. Other Pacific Crest Trail hikers found her July 23, 2017, submerged in the South Fork of the Kings River in Kings Canyon National Park, California. The 2017 hiking season had many dangerous river crossings because of the unusually high snowpack from the previous winter. Xiaokui Tri Wang. Chinese citizen and Pacific Crest Trail thru hiker Xiaokui Tri Wang, 27, was found on July 30th, 2017, in Rancheria Creek in Carrot Canyon, downstream from where the Pacific Crest Trail crosses the creek in Yosemite National Park. No information was available as to how or why Wang perished. Emily Lang and Emma Place. On August 12, 2017, 19-year-old Emily Lang and 19-year-old Emma Place both fell off a 150-foot cliff along the PCT near Mount Hood in Oregon. Both bodies landed on rocks at the base of a waterfall about 6 miles northwest of Timberline Lodge. A group of hikers spotted the women that same evening from above a ravine and called 911. They told the dispatcher that both women were not moving and they could see blood on the rocks. "One is still alive. Please hurry," they said. After a few stressful minutes, however, she stopped breathing, and efforts to revive her were not successful. It's unclear which one of the girls was still alive when they were discovered. Next, Finn Bastian. On August 27, 2019, 28-year-old Finn Bastian, a German thru hiker on the PCT, was crossing a wooden bridge along the trail at around 4 p.m. when a tree fell on him. Two young women who were hiking with him, Larissa Stawicki, 27, of Lüneburg, Germany, and Melanie Teek, 38, called 911 and search and rescue teams responded. After pulling Bastian out from under the tree, medics transported him to a trailhead and began performing CPR. They were not able to revive him. The sheriff's department stated that the tree that killed Finn had rotted away at the base. Trevor Lauder. On March 16, 2020, 22-year-old Trevor Lauder started his hike on the Pacific Crest Trail. He hiked to Lake Morena on day 1 and made it to Mount Laguna by day 3. He hiked through snowy mountains and desert heat right from the start. Trevor met 2 other hikers along the way, and they continued the hike together. On March 26th, Trevor and his new friends left a cafe for the long, steep, and dangerous climb into the San Jacinto Mountains. Trevor texted his father saying they hit 6,100 feet and were headed back into snow. Trevor slept that night at mile 166.5 near where the Phobes Saddle Trail hits the PCT. On March 27, 2020, Trevor was off to Idlewild. It was a wintry morning. The winds were fierce, blowing low clouds over the desert divide. It was still snowing when he got to the Spittler Peak Trail at just after 9 a.m. After more climbing, Trevor and his new friends arrived at Apache Peak. With no snow safety equipment, Trevor and his friends proceeded slowly across the slope of Apache Peak. Hiking single file and 50 feet apart, Trevor and his 2 partners were confident yet cautious. In an instant, however, Trevor was gone. Trevor slipped on snow-covered ice and fell down a 600-foot chute. He died doing what he loved, living his dream on the PCT, far above Palm Springs. In seconds, he lay motionless on the mountain. Trevor sadly succumbed to his injuries before search and rescue could get to him. Lastly, we have Gavin Johnson. Gavin Johnson, 28, who was missing for 8 months, was found in June 2019 after heading out on the Pacific Crest Trail. Gavin Johnson's family said he had virtually no hiking experience and was likely having a mental health crisis before he disappeared. His remains were eventually found south of Stevens Pass in the Alpine Lakes Wilderness area, which is in the Central Cascades of Washington state. Gavin had called his father, Marvin, saying he wanted to go into the forest to pray and become closer with God. The weekend before he went missing, Johnson told his parents he'd been talking with Jesus, and he wanted to quit his new job and be homeless, according to his stepmother, Deborah Johnson. A forest official later confirmed that he spoke with Johnson sometime in October of 2018 in Skykomish. That was the last confirmed sighting. Gavin was a devout Catholic who attended daily Mass several times a week at Our Lady Perpetual Help Church in Everett. When he wasn't at church, he could often be seen at the Safeway on Broadway, where he spent much of his working life. He also had a job at an aerospace parts manufacturer, and in his spare time, he liked to play video games, classical guitar, and spend time with his parents. According to the family, a hiker spotted Johnson's body near the trail by Glacier Lake in a sleeping bag with a rosary in his hand. He was found with a phone, wallet, and gear that he reportedly bought just before leaving. Reportedly, before leaving for the hike, Gavin had sold all his belongings and bought over $1,100 in gear from Cabela's Outdoor Supply. Before heading out, he stopped by the Everett Gospel Missions Men's Shelter to donate some money. Gavin's car was parked on the north side of Stevens Pass, but he said he was going south on the trail. Then a hiker reported possibly seeing Gavin about 75 miles south near the Snoqualmie Pass. Family members spent weeks searching, and search and rescue volunteers also scoured the rugged terrain. The first few days of the search were summer-like, and after that, the temperatures dropped into the 30s and 40s. It began raining and then changed to snow. The ground became very soggy. Marvin said that they bought equipment such as snowshoes to keep up with the weather, but eventually he recalled thinking, "We're not going to find him." Gavin Johnson made it less than 15 miles south from Stevens Pass before coming to a stop. He set up camp away from the trail toward Glacier Lake, such that other hikers might miss him as they walked by, Marvin Johnson, his father, said. Tied to his tent was a note, written on the paper wrapping from a flare. On it, Gavin Johnson explained he'd run out of food and would likely die soon. He wrote about what he wanted his funeral arrangements to look like, said Gavin's uncle, Carl Johnson. Also on the note was a date. Gavin's father believes his son was in the wilderness for about 25 days before he passed away. Sad indeed. If you or someone you know needs mental health assistance, please reach out. There are agencies and people out there who can help that truly care. Hello, friends. Steve Stockton here with you. Welcome to our latest video. Today, we bring you the strange story of missing people, lost gold, in the Superstition Mountains. Join me. Let's take a walk and see. Now, I first became aware of the Superstition Mountains in 1978 when author Jim Brandon published a book called Weird America, a guide to places of mystery in the United States. This seminal work in the area of the paranormal, the strange, gives a state-by-state breakdown of all kinds of weird happenings. Here's what Jim had to write about the superstitions, quoting here. 40 miles due east from the neon vinyl motels and nighties of the Phoenix Van Buren Street is a sort of heart of darkness. The name mountains is only one of the deceptions of this spiky huddle of volcanic extrusions raking up from the floor of the hostile desert. Old-timers in the area can tell you more. Little white clouds that suddenly materialize and follow the wanderer, freak gales that spring up while you're inching along some narrow rock ledge, and all sorts of psycho-atmospheric effects in the best Castaneda tradition that die away immediately if you leave some apparently sensitive area. Jim continues, quote, longtime seekers of the dazzling treasures believe hidden here. Of course, there are treasures, half a dozen of them, including the lost Dutchman mine, which we'll get to in a moment, swear that there are certain caves and rocks that simply cannot be photographed. And then there's the whole question of Native Americans. Some claim that they have never seen one in the area. Others are equally sure they have seen many, all pygmies. The Native Americans themselves are pretty well agreed that the abode of the supreme evil forces of the Southwest live in the Superstition. The Pima and Maricopa steer a wide course around the mountains, thinking that entering them means immediate death or diabolical possession. Now, the Apache do not avoid the entire area, but only certain places that they too regard as hideously evil. Students of little-known Apache folklore believe that the chief medicine place is a secret cave, possibly on the peak known as Geronimo's Head. Another possible spot, they say, is Needle Canyon, which is near Weaver's Needle. We'll get to that in a minute. Apache spokesmen have recently revealed this much, that the tribe believes it is in a special relationship with the mountain spirits, a secret society of strange beings who do special work. For the Apache, these sacred mountains are a sort of gateway to the hereafter, through which the souls of the dead must pass, and it is the function of the mountain spirits to guide them. The Native Americans help by protecting the area from white desecration. End quote. That's a local saying that many people who go into the mountains are not the same when they come out. This may have very well been the case with an eccentric German immigrant of the 19th century named Jacob Waltz, although this Dutchman does seem to have hit pay dirt of sufficient enough richness that generations of treasure hunters have swarmed over this pile of rocks looking for his lost gold mine. Beyond that, there are at least 3 other major treasures and as many minor ones: Geronimo's treasure, the Jesuit treasure, and the Peralta treasure, which we'll get to shortly. That treasure is also the link to one of the most forbidding part of the superstition's evil repute. The Peraltas, a prominent family from Sonora, discovered fabulous gold lodes here in 1830, but were wiped out along with their crews by the Apache in 1848. Estimates of that slaughter number anywhere from 68 to 400. In the 20th century alone, there were 36 known deaths and disappearances in this area. Despite some of these being solved, author Kurt Gentry points out in his book The Killer Mountains, this still leaves a huge number of unexplained deaths and disappearances for such a sparsely populated area. One of the stranger aspects is the method of these demises. A great number of these involved decapitation. Apparently this began in 1896 with the death of a slightly deranged but harmless mountain man named Elijah Rivas. In recent years, says Kurt Gentry, these unexplained deaths and disappearances have been increasing. Now remember, he wrote this many years ago. but he closes with this observation. There's something important in this particular area. What? Now, Jim Brandon's book, Weird America, it is long out of print. As of this recording, there's one used copy available on Amazon for the princely sum of $459. I'm fortunate enough to have a signed copy that I bought in 1978. It's one of my most treasured books. If you can find a copy, it's worth checking out. But I digress. Let us continue. Now, the Superstition Mountains get their name from old Pima Indian legends, and the name itself aptly describes this mysterious place, which, as I stated, has been the subject of many strange mysteries, phantoms, and legends since ancient times. According to many Native Americans in the area, the mountains themselves are believed to hold the entrance to the underworld. Many of the cliff dwellings and caves are also ancient and actually show signs that at one time they were occupied. Though no one knows for sure who it was that actually occupied these caves and other dwellings, there are many theories on the subject. Whoever it was, the mountains became a bastion for the Apache tribe sometime in the 1800s. Earlier, I mentioned the Peralta family said that in the 1840s they came from northern New Mexico and developed rich gold mines somewhere in the Superstition Mountains. In 1848, the last expedition to export gold from the mountains and back to Mexico was undertaken, but those people were ambushed, according to the legends, by the Apache tribe. Only one or two of the people on this expedition, all members of the Peralta family, managed to escape, and even today, this area is still known as the Massacre Grounds. Now, there are a few people who are alleged to have known the location of these mines, and there have been more than a few maps that have surfaced out there throughout the years. However, when someone would ask questions in order to go and find these mines, the alleged maps would somehow have gone missing or otherwise not be able to be located anymore. On top of this mystery surrounding the maps, men who have claimed to have found the mines are never actually able to point out to anyone where they were or were able to make their own way back to them. Otherwise, these same men would often claim that some strange disaster had happened before they were able to make any sort of claim on the gold or the mines themselves. All this, when put together, adds to the legend and lore of there being a lost mine or mines somewhere in this strange, mysterious mountain range. Now, the aforementioned Dutchman, German native Jacob Waltz that I mentioned, back in the 1870s, he claimed he had somehow contacted a descendant of the Peralta family and that they showed him where the mine was. The Dutchman's claim was that he actually knew the location of the mine. Along with his partner, Jacob Weiser, the two claimed to have not only worked in the actual mine, but they'd also hidden away a few caches of gold in the Superstitions. Now, most of these legends have the caches hidden near a place called Weaver's Needle, which is a fairly well-known landmark that I mentioned earlier as near one of the places where the spirits supposedly dwell. However, it seems as though some bad luck befell the two almost right away, depending on which story you choose to set store by. As some say the Apaches killed Jacob Weiser, but many believe it was actually the Dutchman, Jacob Waltz, himself, who murdered his partner to keep the gold and possibly the secret of where the mines were, for and to himself. Later, though, due to his failing health, Jacob Waltz ended up having to stop mining gold and going on adventures and moved to Phoenix to live out the rest of his life. He passed away in 1891, allegedly having only revealed the location of the mine to one other person, a woman named Julia Thomas, who was a neighbor of Jacob's and cared for him when his health made it so he could no longer care for himself. She claimed that he had not only shared with her the location of the mine, but also the location of the caches of gold that he and his ill-fated partner had hidden some 20 years earlier. She even claimed he drew her a map, but admits that she just saw it as a bunch of scribbling and was unsure what to do with it or make of it. So she sold it for a measly $7. However, in the following years, there were dozens upon dozens of seekers of the mine and the caches, Julia included, and as far as is known, not a single one of them was ever able to find either one. This is when the mine seems to have first become known as the Lost Dutchman's Mine, and more people would go on throughout the years to traverse the dangerous paths and trails in and along these mountains, searching caves and other dangerous areas, only to come up completely empty-handed. In fact, many of these intrepid treasure hunters not only met their demise, but many with some sort of foul play or another suspected in the process. Again, these sometimes strange deaths seem to some to lead credence to the stories, legends, and superstitions of not only the Lost Dutchman's mine and the curse allegedly attached to it, but to the strange Superstition Mountains themselves. Now let's take a look at some of the strange disappearances surrounding the hunt for this elusive mine and the treasure it's said to contain. The Lost Dutchman's gold mine is one of the most famous mysteries in the United States, so it should come as no surprise that so many people go out each year and search for it in earnest, despite all the aforementioned strange and somewhat spooky legends that surround it and the Superstition Mountains themselves. Rumor has it that approximately 600 people have lost their lives or gone missing in search of these treasures. Are these people out of their minds, following what could simply be the delirious ramblings of an old man who knew he was so close to death? Or should they be considered as ambitious dream chasers in pursuit of wealth beyond anything they could imagine? We'll leave that one up for you to decide. Now, the aforementioned massacre that happened in 1848 regarding the Peralta family, these people are said to have discovered the Dutchman's mine right within the Superstition Mountains, where most people believe it to be. The problem with that is, did they actually find it? Could it be the alleged Superstition's curse? As they set out on what should have otherwise been a routine gold mining expedition, the entire family was slain by the Apache Indian tribe. They were said to have been ambushed, and any gold the family had on them is said to have been hidden right then and there by the same tribe. There's also a man named Jesse Kappen, who was said to have allowed the lost Dutchman's mine to become an obsession for him. Jesse became convinced that he would somehow be the one to not only locate the mine itself, but the one who would gain the spoils of it as well. Wealth and riches beyond anyone's wildest dreams had entranced Jesse. He was absolutely enthralled with finding the mine. Jesse was a night bellman at a hotel and was affectionately called the Gentle Giant by those who knew him best. In November of 2009, he had finally saved up enough money and vacation time to go on and pursue his dream of finding the lost legendary treasure. Jerry traded in his car for a Jeep and told his mother that he would call her as soon as he could. But the first call she received wasn't from her son, but from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. Jesse's new Jeep and his camp had been found, seemingly abandoned, on Tortilla Mountain. There was no sign of the 35-year-old, and an investigation into his whereabouts quickly ensued. Countless books on the subject and maps littered his apartment when it was searched after he disappeared. It was also found, through the examination of many files on his computer, that he had already gone on 2 other excursions in an attempt to locate it, but with no luck. He hadn't told anyone of these adventures, and it was news to all who knew him when it finally came out. At the devastatingly young age of just 35, Jesse would become another victim of the lost mine when he went on his 3rd trip out into the Tonto National Forest, located in the Superstition Wilderness, back in 2009. Despite there being a very large-scale investigation into what had happened to him, it took 3 years for his remains to be located and identified. Volunteers with the Superstition Search and Rescue Organization found Jesse's remains wedged inside of a tiny crevice or opening that seemed no fully grown human being would ever have been able to fit into. It's theorized that perhaps he somehow fell from a ledge directly above where he was eventually found, 180 feet in the ground. There's never been any proof of this, and the official cause of death could not be determined. There's also the fact that his remains were found in such a tiny and thin place that even animals in flooding couldn't touch him. There was no trauma to his skull, and the authorities and everyone else were left to wonder and speculate did just that. What happened to Jesse Kappen on this trip that was so different from the previous 2 he'd taken? And why was he going in secret every time? And how did he get wedged into such a tiny spot in which he was eventually found? Is it possible that Jesse had in fact found the treasure and maybe was hiding it down there in that impossibly tiny crevice when something happened to him? Sure, anything is possible, but we will most likely never know what that something was, if anything, and what we're left with is nothing but rumor and conjecture, which adds even more mystery to the Lost Dutchman legend. Back in June of 1931, Dr. Adolf Ruth took 2 weeks to go and search for the treasure and ended up becoming yet another victim. Dr. Ruth was a veterinarian from Washington, D.C., and it said that his disappearance was what sparked many of the modern-day legends about the gold and the mountains themselves. This was the first nationally reported story regarding someone disappearing in search of the treasure, and many believe that had it not been for the Great Depression, perhaps this story would have been but a mere blip on the radar of a depressed and oppressed nation. However, it seems that reading about a treasure hunter with a mysterious map, despite the fact that he died in the process of trying to locate it, seemed much more appealing for Americans to read about than the dire state of the nation at the time. Dr. Ruth had, by some unknown means, allegedly gotten his hands on a treasure map that led to the Lost Dutchman's gold that is said to have dated back to the period of the Mexican Revolution, which took place between 1909 and 1923. Irwin Cleve Ruth, Dr. Adolf Ruth's son, had acquired a copy of the map as a seemingly generous reward for saving the life of a Mexican officer and handed it off to his father as a gift. Now, Adolf had almost lost his life at least once, searching for other allegedly lost treasures across the country, and this certainly wasn't his first time doing this sort of thing. He had suffered severe injuries and brushes with death a few times, but wasn't the least bit deterred. In fact, it was while he was in the hospital recuperating from one such accident that he started planning his search for the fabled lost Dutchman mine. Sometime in mid-May of 1931, Dr. Ruth was able to convince a couple of men, more specifically 2 cowboy/prospectors, to help him with his quest. These men worked at what was then known as the Quarter Circle U Ranch, and against the advice of the ranch's owner, these 2 men agreed to pack him up and lead him into the mountains. Their names were Leroy Purnell and Jack Keenan, and they packed Dr. Ruth into a place called Willow Springs in West Boulder Canyon around June 14, 1931. It was only a short time later that Dr. Ruth disappeared. The owner of the Quarter Circle U Ranch, a man named Tex Barkley, rode into Adolf's camp on June 20, 1931, and upon examining the site, determined the doctor hadn't been there in at least a full 24 hours. Tex alerted the authorities, and an intense and large-scale search lasted 45 days, and eventually he was tracked from Willow Springs to a point on the east slope of Blacktop Mesa. On December 10, 1931, a skull was found and was quickly able to be identified as that of Adolf Ruth. Deputy Sheriff Jeff Adams and ranch owner Tex Barkley found the remainder of the doctor's skeleton a little over a month later in January of 1932. It was found in a small tributary on the eastern slope of Blacktop Mesa. The map, which has now come to be known as the Ruth-Peralta map, was found in his camp, and the newspaper, the Arizona Republic, published a copy of it. Now, the Maricopa and Pinal County Sheriff's Offices both agree that Dr. Adolf Ruth wasn't murdered, as so many people have implied since his remains were found, but that he most likely died of dehydration and starvation, which technically made his death determined to be natural causes, at least officially. Many people believe that because his skull was found so far removed from the rest of his body that he must have been decapitated. But those rumors were said to have been put to rest with the explanation of coyotes and other animals, as well as post-mortem predation and activity. However, there are still those who believe thoroughly that something more sinister than being unprepared or perhaps becoming lost befell Dr. Ruth. Regardless of what actually happened to him, it's another tragedy nonetheless that can be attributed to the seeking of this one particular treasure. And despite the tragedy of Dr. Ruth being an extremely public ordeal, especially for the time, it didn't stop other people from going in search of this alleged vast vein of riches, just waiting to be claimed up there somewhere in the mountains. In fact, it's almost as though these strange disappearances and unexplained deaths helped to lure more people to it. Sometime in the 1940s, a 62-year-old treasure hunter by the name of James Cravy took to the mountains on his own quest for the lost gold. Unfortunately, and quite bizarrely, he also came to the fate of having met his demise, also with his head being found separated and far removed from his body. James didn't keep his travels secret like so many before him, though, and his journey to find the mine was a big deal. He made sure his search for the gold was the biggest spectacle yet. Before he boarded the helicopter, which he had hired to drop him off in the mountains, he told many of his friends and family, and basically anyone who would listen to him, that he knew the exact location of the mine and that he would be in and out in no time. He gave the helicopter pilot who dropped him off the coordinates for where to pick him up in 10 days' time, as this was how long he had planned to be there. No more, no less than 10 days, and he would come out of it wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. Of course, when the helicopter did return for James, he was nowhere in sight. To this day, nobody really knows what happened to him, but it's presumed that he was slain due to the aforementioned fact that his head was found separated from his shoulders, but there isn't any evidence one way or the other. His camp was found intact and with only 2 days of his food and supplies having been used. Then in early 1952, a man from Dayton, Ohio named Joseph Kelly took his turn meeting his demise in search of the treasure, and it seems as though he just disappeared off the face of the earth. That is, until 2 years later, when his remains were found. Upon further examination, it was concluded that he had been shot in the head, but no more information has ever been learned as to who killed him, when, or why. Later that same year, 2 young men from California went in search of the treasure and were never seen or heard from again. No remains have ever been found, and their case remains a mystery of the mountain like so many that came before and after. It's said that the only thing more mysterious than James Kidd's disappearance while searching for the Dutchman's gold was his life in general. James had very little family and even fewer friends. He had what has been described as a ridiculous sum of money, most of which he acquired through investing. No one could ever figure out, and James never told, where he got the initial cash to make those investments in the first place, though. It is interesting to note here that James is also said to have come and gone from the Superstition Mountains quite regularly, often making very short trips, though he of course never explained to anyone what he was doing when he went on these many excursions. Speculation ran rampant after he disappeared that perhaps he'd found the treasure and was going to and from it and taking small amounts as he needed, and that's how he really built his fortune. Though he was reported as missing on December 29, 1949, it's said that he'd been gone for a very long time at this point, but there was no one in his life that he was close enough to that would have noticed or even cared that he was no longer around. A few years after his disappearance, it was found that James Kidd had left behind a fortune of $500,000. In today's money, that would amount to somewhere around $10.5 million US. Quite bizarrely, it's unknown whatever happened to this massive fortune, because the stipulation for anyone to be left this money is that they had to be able to definitively prove the existence of ghosts. An avid lifelong believer in all things paranormal and supernatural, the few who did know him in any capacity were not surprised when this news came out. Most people believed that he was simply killed for his gold, or that someone had followed him up into the mountains that last time, maybe even the man who is said to have dropped him off from the helicopter there in the first place. But again, nobody knows. The man who brought him here also met with him once a month to check on him and make sure he had ample supplies to be able to continue on, so it seems he was making a longer trek than usual that last time. It's still unknown what became of him, and no remains or clues have ever been found. Now here it should be noted that between the years of 1955 and 1978, multiple skulls with bullet holes in them were found in the mountains. Aside from those we've already discussed here, there were at least an additional 2 cadavers found without their heads, but in these cases, the skulls were never found. The actual cause of death for these 2, and so many more unfortunate people who ended up as nothing but remains in the superstitions, are still unknown. Another unfortunate soul who was unknowingly destined to end up another statistic of the mountains and the gold it allegedly hid so well, and also one of the owners of the headless corpse mentioned above, was a man named J. Clapp. Jay spent more than a decade going in and out of the superstitions and trying to plot his way through in search of the Dutchman's treasure, before seeming to simply vanish into thin air in July of 1961. There have never been any clues or leads as to what could have become of him, and to this day, his skull has never been located. Interestingly, and somewhat bizarrely, his body was found near Weaver's Needle, which is the exact same place that said the Dutchman himself had hidden his gold caches. Elisha Rivas, who I mentioned earlier, was definitely an interesting character. He settled into the Superstition Mountains in 1872 and was quickly, and some say aptly, nicknamed the Madman of the Mountains. He convinced the local Native American tribes in the area where he chose to settle that he was an absolute lunatic by running around naked throughout the canyons while wielding knives. Now, the natives weren't the only ones who chose to stay clear of this madman, and he is said to have lived a very solitary and somewhat quiet life on the mountains until one day he just wasn't there anymore. Now, it's unknown how long he'd been missing before his remains were found some 24 years later in 1896, but they were very badly decomposed. Then there were 2 men who are only described as Easterners who are said to have gone out looking for the elusive and deadly treasure the same year Elisha Reeves' remains were found. Nobody knows what became of them either. No trace of them has ever been found. Then, in April of 1958, another mystery was added to the ever-growing list of mountain victims when a deserted campsite was found somewhere on the northern outskirts. The scene was pretty dreadful, with bed skirts, sheets, and blankets described as having been soaked with blood found left behind. Along with the bloody bedclothes, there were cooking tools, a Geiger counter, cleaning supplies, and what appears to be personal letters. It's still unknown whether it was simply one person or several people who occupied this camp, and this is mainly because someone had taken the time to tear the names and addresses from the letters, effectively leaving no trace as to who resided there or any other personal relevant information about them. No body or bodies were ever found either, and it's simply marked down as another tragic mystery for this whole bigger puzzle that the mountains and the alleged lost treasure hold. Also, in 1910, in a cave high up on the Superstitions, the skeletal remains of a woman who is said to have been clutching a small sack of gold was found. There were no remnants of any clothing and nothing to allude to what happened to her in the first place. Quite honestly, it's said as though it simply looked like she had found some gold and simply perished right then and there on the spot with no explanation at all. These are the types of mysteries that surround places like the Superstition Mountains. The Lost Dutchman's mine has become something of a legend in pop culture. It's been the subject of many books and even TV shows since it all began so very long ago. To this day, there are people who are obsessed with the alleged maps and cracking the codes and discovering the secrets within in order to find the treasure. As far as what's been actually proven, though, we still don't know if anyone has ever actually found it and whether or not it ever existed at all in the first place. What about all of the mysterious disappearances and strange deaths? How do we explain all the bodies found in such bizarre states of being, and the overall seeming bad luck that no doubt surrounds not only the legend, but those who go in search of it? Even if we only take all the skulls that have been found throughout the years with bullets in them, it would seem as though at least someone were trying to keep something a secret out there in the superstitions. What that something is, though, nobody really knows. It does seem a great number of these unexplained disappearances and strange deaths circle around people who are out in search of the treasure, and it's for that very reason alone that this particular mystery is one that many believe should be left alone, to remain unsolved. But there are those who simply can't resist the call of the mountains, though. Or maybe it's the fact that should they find the treasure, they would know wealth beyond anything they could ever have imagined, even if it means tempting fate and possibly ending up dead or worse. It's hard to say what's really going on here, but the allure and the danger are equally undeniable, and more than likely this is another one of those bizarre legends that will continue on through the ages, perhaps until someone finds the treasure. There are tens of thousands of people who go missing every single year in the United States alone. These are due to kidnappings, homicides, people taking their own lives, and many other situations and circumstances. There are cases, though, that come up from time to time where a person or people go missing in such unusual and enigmatic circumstances that family members of the missing, the authorities, and the public in general are left scratching their collective heads, sometimes for decades to come. Sure, there are theories and rumors, always tons of speculation as to the how or the why or the who and the where and the when. But the fact of the matter is that, most likely, no one will ever know the truth. This is one such case. Now, it's not a challenge to go missing in a national park. The woods of our world in general are filled with all sorts of dangers we could run, slip, fall, walk, or somehow get into in general. One misstep or wrong turn could turn a person's peaceful hiking or camping trip into a life or death situation in which there could possibly be no return or going back from. One such place of extreme and almost unreal beauty, combined with labyrinth-like twists and turns, tall cliffs, and scree fields, where a person could literally take one wrong step and end up in a disastrous struggle for their very survival, is Glacier State National Park. This is where approximately 240 visitors have died in the past 240 years. Some succumbed to drowning, others took their own lives, others still had a tragic accident befall them, and still others were simply victims of Mother Nature. The list of ways to die in the woods is tragically long and seemingly never-ending. Glacier State National Park is located in western Montana, United States, and we're going to discuss just a handful of cases of men who have gone missing and have never been seen again, dead or alive. The title of this video comes from how these cases are classified: Lost but Never Found. Way back in the summer of 1924, two brothers named Joseph and William Whitehead went missing somewhere in the lush forests and beautiful mountains of Glacier State National Park, and they were never found, alive or deceased. Their particular tragic disappearances took place in the 20-mile span between the Granite Park Chalet and Lake McDonald. Joseph Whitehead was the elder of the two brothers at 29 years old. He was an engineer for Universal Battery Company, located in Chicago, Illinois. His brother William was just 22 and attending MIT in Boston, Massachusetts at the time. The photographs used in the reward photo after they disappeared show them as two impeccably groomed and very well-dressed young men. Letters they had written to their mother showed their personalities to be kind of reserved and extremely respectful. At the time of their disappearance, the brothers had been traversing the wilderness of Glacier National Park for more than a week. The hikes they went on while there included those to Iceberg Lake, Cracker Lake, and Grinnell Glacier. They traveled by car and boat and then horseback from Glacier Park Lodge to Granite Park Chalet. They were on an adventure of a lifetime. Their itinerary had them next hiking 20 miles from the chalet to the Lewis Hotel, which is now called the Lake McDonald Lodge. William and Joseph set out on August 24th with a plan to board the Great Northern Railroad's Oriental Limited home to Chicago at the end of their long and somewhat arduous journey. These young men had been characterized by those that knew them as cautious and conservative. They were not the type of men who took any kind of great risk or who would purposely put themselves in harm's way for the sake of some sort of possibly ill-fated adventure. They were well prepared and seemed to have planned every single thing they did and that they were going to do while on this mini vacation together. On August 20th, 1924, just 4 days before they would go missing, Joseph wrote in part to his mother, "We are enjoying ourselves very much and taking no chances of injuring ourselves. Don't worry, Mother. We won't get into any danger." 4 days after writing this, on a bright and sunny Sunday morning, the brothers left the Granite Park Chalet on foot and headed into the forest for a hike which would take them to the Lewis Hotel at Lake McDonald for the last leg of their journey. They were last spotted here, wearing what are still described to this day as hiking knickers, and smiling, a mere 10 miles from their final destination. On September 1st, the boys' mother was there at the train station in Chicago to meet her sons. Sadly, they never stepped off the train, and thus began an intensive and rather extensive, especially for the time, search for them. At one point, even then-President Calvin Coolidge went to the park and told the rangers involved to spare no expense in the search for these two young men. According to Interior Secretary F.M. Goodwin, 13 rangers, 2 famous Indian guides, and 7 tried mountaineers were out for more than 2 weeks. That was reported on September 16th of that year. There never has been a search in the national parks conducted with more vigor and effort, he continued. By now, this was national headline news, and the Whitehead brothers had seemed, much to the nation's surprise and sadness, to have disappeared into thin air. The park's chief ranger and superintendent, Charles Crable, when he became aware of the men's disappearance, launched another massive search effort, confident that they would be the ones to find the boys' remains. It had now become a recovery mission. With the coming snows, the search shifted to include a few criminal possibilities. For more than 2 years, the new chief of the Young Bureau of Investigation personally oversaw the efforts of his G-men. Almost every month, J. Edgar Hoover himself filed a detailed progress report with the director of the National Park Service or the Secretary of the Interior. Clues for the investigators quickly ran out, as did the patience of Dora B. Whitehead, the missing men's mother. Now, that's according to Charles R. Butch Farabee, Jr., author of Death, Daring, and Disaster, Search and Rescue in the National Parks. Even J. Edgar Hoover himself instructed the FBI to get involved, but it was still all in vain. Not a single clue as to the brothers' whereabouts was ever found. Most people just figured the men had come to a tragic but accidental demise. Others, though, were more convinced some sort of foul play had befallen them, perhaps at the hands of bootleggers in the area. However, no evidence ever turned up, one way or the other. The men's mother, Dora, started to believe in the bootleg and foul play rumors and wrote to the Secretary of the Interior, saying, "I want my 2 sons, dead or alive. Surely I'm not asking too much. They belong to me. I have a right to have them. My 2 sons were murdered or kidnapped in a national park, and I am pleading with the government of the United States to find them." Now, the probe into the disappearance was exhaustive, yet still nothing became of it. It's been written that the disappearance of the Whitehead brothers is the most perplexing and inexplicable mystery in our records. This case did come to serve a purpose, though, one for the greater good. From this point on, the job of the park ranger was forever changed. Now, not only was preserving the wildlife and natural resources of the park their most important job, but protecting, finding, and rescuing the visitors to the parks became their biggest priority. So, whatever happened to the Whitehead brothers? Decades later now, and still the glacier wilderness has divulged no clues. It has, in fact, remained eerily silent, in not only this case, but in the case of others we're going to discuss today who disappeared under strange circumstances and who had their disappearances itself become truly even more bizarre by the lack of evidence and clues left behind. Mainly, there were none, at all. All of them fit to put under the rather heading of lost, never found, in the wilds of Glacier National Park. Another case, a man named W. Cosby Bell hiked up Mount Brown in the summer of 1933 and, strangely, never came back down again. Another case of the mountain seemingly swallowing someone whole and spitting out no clue as to where he ended up or what happened to him. Records on that case are very scarce and hard to come by due to the date and lack of record keeping by the park services. Glacier National Park has 1 million acres of rugged terrain alone. This extremely vast expanse is almost unimaginable when trying to wrap our heads around the scope of a search that would need to cover this much area in order to be fully complete. Fast forward, on May 29, 2003, a 40-year-old man from Dorr, Michigan, named Larry Kimball, arrived in the park. This was evidenced by an entrance ticket eventually found in his 1998 dark blue GMC truck during the initial search. When they hadn't seen or heard from him in approximately 6 weeks, Larry's friends and loved ones reported him as missing. The truck was found abandoned at the Rocky Point trailhead near Lake McDonald on June 16th. Nobody had any clue whatsoever as to where he'd been or what he'd been doing from the time he had entered the park until the time his vehicle was discovered abandoned. It's a huge mystery how even search dogs and park SAR personnel, including rangers, could fail to turn up, once again, even a single solitary clue as to where in the world Larry could have ended up. It's the same thing over and over again, the same thing every time. A person enters the park and is never seen or heard from again, and there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever to even allude to where they may have gone. Imagine the families and how they feel and what they must be going through. Not knowing must be absolutely gut-wrenching. The Allegan County Sheriff's Office, back home in Larry's state of Michigan, took the initial missing persons report. Sergeant Tony Saucedo stated, "His family is very worried about him." Jim Kimball, Larry's brother, explained to investigators that nobody had seen or heard from his brother since spring of that year. Larry's residence was searched, but that too was an unfruitful search and yielded nothing of any value to authorities. Rangers did discover that Larry didn't even have a backcountry permit and discovered no camping equipment in his abandoned vehicle. There was also no record of him recently lodging in or even near the park. His family and friends reported that he was not the type to hike or camp and were unaware of any itinerary he may have had when entering the park. Nobody even knew beforehand that Larry had planned on going on this trip into the mountains in the first place. Authorities and Larry's loved ones were stumped, to say the least, and the lack of any real clues or evidence as to his whereabouts stymied everyone. Rangers initiated the first attempt at locating him on June 27th, but despite a search dog and handler being brought in to search the Rocky Point area, the attempt was unsuccessful and, once again, yielded nothing. A second search effort on July 10th and a planned and mapped-out grid search on the 11th also led nowhere. Missing person flyers were posted at park trailheads in the vicinity of Rocky Point and distributed around the park. Sergeant Clark said rangers are still seeking information or clues from the public or perhaps even other visitors to that area of the park during the same stretch of time who may have seen or spoken to Larry. Larry Kimball is described as being 6 feet 1 inches tall and weighed around 150 to 160 pounds. He has brown hair and wears glasses. When his family members last saw him, his hair was shoulder length and he was clean-shaven. For the time being, efforts to find Kimball will focus on trying to develop leads from what we found in his truck and following up on interview with his friends and family, Sergeant Clark said July 14th. Anyone with any information about the disappearance of Larry Kimball can call the Allegan County Detectives at 269-673-0520 or Glacier National Park Dispatch at 406-888-7801. There's been no new information in 19 years, and not a single clue has ever surfaced as to what could have become of Larry Kimball. If we think about the vastness mentioned earlier and the acres and acres of rough and rugged terrain in this park, 4 men seem extremely small, minuscule even, when compared to that amount of land. Approximately 1 year after the unsuccessful search for Mr. W. Cosby Bell on August 30th, 1934, an Ohio State University college professor named Dr. Charles Francis Hillis Lumley was also last heard from while at Goat Haunt Camp on the 13th. The search for him was, of course, unsuccessful. A 21-year-old seasonal park employee named David Paul Wilson climbed up going to the Sun Mountain in 1963 and also never returned. If you look at the states with the most missing people every year, it's no surprise that states like California, which is the state with the most missing people currently, Alaska, which has the most missing people every year, and Arizona, Oregon, Washington, Vermont, those are always in the top 10. Is it just a coincidence that these states are states that house national parks and mountain ranges? Places with acres and acres of woods and dense forested areas? There's just something about the great outdoors and the great unknown that as human beings simply calls out to us, perhaps even lures us, but also keeps us off our guard with its beauty and tranquility. While many people are found, whether alive or deceased, there are so many of those throughout the country and even the world, where we just are left wondering, sitting back and scratching our heads, and hopefully becoming ever more vigilant and safe when we go out there ourselves into the great unknown. Hello friends, and welcome to another episode. In this video, we invite you to join us for a trip down the strange rabbit hole that some refer to as the Bennington Triangle. The area known as the Bennington Triangle, which surrounds Glastonbury Mountain in the New England state of Vermont, has a long, strange history of bizarre occurrences. This includes UFO sightings, Bigfoot encounters, eerie lights and sounds, and the triangle also happens to be the location of several unsolved disappearances during the 1940s and 1950s. If that isn't odd enough, according to Native American lore, the area is heavily cursed. The Native American tribes of New England have always known something was off with the area and tend to steer clear of it at all costs. One particularly chilling legend from the Algonquin tribe cautions of the existence of what are described as evil rocks in the mountains, which have the ability to spring open and devour those unfortunate enough to step upon them. Now, this is rather interesting, considering how people have vanished without a trace from within the triangle. New England author Joseph A. is the person considered to have coined the term Bennington Triangle in 1992 while doing a radio broadcast about paranormal and other unusual activity in the area. According to Citro's findings, he states that the area has similar characteristics with the equally strange Bridgewater Triangle in the bordering state of Massachusetts, which has been written about extensively by cryptozoologist Loren Coleman. The Bennington Triangle is centered around the heavily wooded forest of Glastonbury Mountain and also includes the small towns of Bennington, Woodford, and Shaftesbury, and also the abandoned or ghost towns of Somerset and Glastonbury. Over the last 200 years, there have been many encounters with and sightings of a Bigfoot-like cryptid in the area surrounding Glastonbury Mountain. The locals, as well as paranormal and cryptozoological investigators, refer to this unknown creature as the Bennington Monster. The earliest recorded sightings of the beast occurred in the early 1800s, when a stagecoach loaded with passengers was forced to stop its journey due to a heavily washed-out section of the stage road. The driver of the stagecoach observed that there were very large footprints in the mud, which were way too large to belong to any human. While the perplexed driver was pondering these prints, the stagecoach was suddenly attacked by a large creature that was strong enough to flip the stagecoach over onto its side. The terrified passengers stated that they observed a frightening pair of large eyes peering into the overturned coach at them before whatever the creature was screamed and then ran off to disappear in the surrounding woods. The passengers would later describe the monster as a large, hairy, black creature well over 6 feet in height. The area has long been rife with tales of people suddenly going missing within the area of the triangle. One of the oddest disappearances was that of a man named Carol Herrick in 1943. Herrick disappeared while on a hunting trip just a few miles northeast of the abandoned town of Glastonbury. Although his body was found 3 days later, it was observed to be surrounded by dozens of footprints, too large for a normal person. It was also determined that Carol appeared to have been squeezed to death. Then, beginning in 1945 and continuing for the next 5 years, people began to go mysteriously missing from the area with an alarming regularity. A man named Midi Rivers, a 74-year-old hunting guide very familiar with the area, went missing on November 12, 1945. Rivers, who had led many hunting parties in the area over decades, was taking a group of 4 hunters to the oddly named Hell Hollow area which is located within the southwest forest of Glastonbury. While leading the hunting party back to camp, he somehow got ahead of the other four and, for reasons unknown, never returned to the campsite. At first, the other hunters were not overly concerned, as they knew Midi to be an expert woodsman and knowledgeable guide. When Rivers still had failed to return the next day, the authorities were contacted and an extensive search was held, comprising as many as 300 worried locals, as well as a number of U.S. Army soldiers who had been dispatched from nearby Fort Devens in Massachusetts. They searched through the deep woods for 8 straight days, but the only possible evidence found was an ammo cartridge for the same type rifle that Rivers was known to be carrying. The cartridge was found in a shallow stream, and there was no evidence of any foul play or animal attack nearby. Although they had no luck with the extensive search effort, many of Midi's friends and those local to the area were sure with the man's knowledge of the woods and survival skills he would eventually return. However, this never came to be, and no trace of the missing guide has ever been found. The area from which Rivers vanished is near Long Trail Road and Vermont State Route 9. The very next year, on Sunday, December 1st, 1946, an 18-year-old college student named Paula Weldon went missing while hiking in the same area around Long Trail Road. Easily remembered because she was wearing a bright red jacket, several people recalled seeing her that day, including a shop clerk in Bennington who had provided her with directions, and also a couple of elderly hikers who had been approximately 300 feet behind her on the trail for part of their hike. The alarm was sounded when the college sophomore didn't show up the next morning for her classes at Bennington College. An extensive search was launched by local authorities and included more than 1,000 volunteer searchers. There were also searches conducted from the air, and with the assistance of the FBI, and a $5,000 reward was offered. When interviewed, the elderly couple who had observed Paula hiking just ahead of them on the trail stated that after they watched her turn a corner on the trail, she seemed to have just vanished. Despite the extensive searches and the offer of the $5,000 reward, no trace of Paula Weldon has ever been found, and her fate remains unknown. Exactly 3 years to the day of the disappearance of Paula Weldon, a man named James Tedford suddenly vanished from a bus on December 1st, 1949. A military veteran and resident of the local Bennington Soldiers' Home, Tedford was returning via bus from St. Albans, where he'd been visiting relatives, when he vanished. Based on eyewitness accounts, Tedford and 13 other passengers were on the bus at the previous stop before the bus had arrived in Bennington. But when the bus pulled into the station, he had somehow disappeared. His bags were still in the luggage rack, and a bus schedule was found lying open on his now empty seat. The other passengers stated that they didn't see Tedford get off the bus at any of the previous stops, and he wasn't on the bus when it pulled into Bennington. Authorities investigated the disappearance and were convinced that no one had seen anything, and there were no suspicious incidents which had occurred during the bus trip. One strange and interesting fact, it should be noted that Tedford's wife, Pearl, had also vanished under mysterious circumstances a couple of years prior. Now, there aren't many details about his early life, but in 1940, Tedford was listed as a resident in Franklin, Vermont, with his wife, Pearl, who was much younger, her age being 28 while he was 56. The strangeness began following Tedford's return to Vermont after the end of his second round of military service near the end of World War II. Upon his return, he found that Pearl had vanished, no trace of her to be found, and the house the couple had rented in Franklin, Vermont, was found to have been left abandoned. Tedford's family claimed no knowledge as to the whereabouts of the missing wife, and stated the last time they had seen her was as she was on her way to the Amoco gas station in Franklin. There was speculation among the locals that rather than having met with foul play, she had understandably grown tired of waiting for her much older husband to return from war and had simply taken off. Whatever the cause, she was never to be seen or heard from again. Tedford was crushed and moved into the local home for soldiers, where he still lived when he vanished. The next year, on October 12, 1950, an 8-year-old boy named Paul Jepson was the next in the area to go missing. Jepson was last seen in the cab of his mother's pickup truck in Bennington, where she had left him to play while she briefly tended to her pigs. When the mother returned, she found that the boy was gone. She quickly looked for him in the nearby immediate area with no luck, after which she reported him missing, and soon hundreds of volunteers had assembled to help search for the missing boy. Tracking dogs were brought in to aid in the search for the missing boy. The dogs were able to pick up his scent and followed it towards Glastonbury Mountain. However, when the scent was lost at a nearby crossroads, it was thought that perhaps the boy had either been abducted by a stranger or had otherwise accepted a ride in a passing automobile. Paul's father stated that, oddly enough, the boy had talked about visiting the mountain almost non-stop for the last week or so. The area around Glastonbury Mountain was searched extensively for the next several days, but sadly no trace of Paul has ever been found. Then, 16 days after Paul Jepson's mysterious disappearance, a woman named Freda Langanger disappeared on October 28, 1950. Freda was camping with several other family members in the forest near Glastonbury Mountain. Langer, then aged 53, along with her cousin, Herbert Elsner, had ventured away from the family's woodland campsite to go on a hike near the Somerset Reservoir. They had managed to hike just a few hundred yards from their campsite when Freda lost her footing and fell into a mountain stream, completely soaking her shoes and clothing. Due to the chilly fall temperature in the mountains, Freda told her cousin to wait while she ran back to their campsite to change into some dry clothes. Her cousin stated that he waited for what seemed like a sufficient amount of time, and when Freda still hadn't returned, he decided to go back to the camp to see if she was okay. However, upon his return, he was shocked to learn that Freda hadn't returned to the campsite at all. She had instead apparently vanished in broad daylight in the distance of a few hundred yards. Freda was reported missing, and over the next several weeks, search parties, with as many as 400 people, including concerned volunteers, law enforcement, firefighters, and military, as well as some aircraft, searched for her and came up empty-handed. Sadly, the search was eventually abandoned. 7 months later, however, on May 12, 1951, Freda's body was discovered near Somerset Reservoir, strangely enough, in an area that had been extensively searched many times previously. Advanced decomposition of her remains meant that no cause of death could be determined, and her case is still unsolved. And then, just as strangely and suddenly as they had begun, the string of disappearances stopped. Freda Langanger was the last person to vanish mysteriously during this time frame, and the only missing persons whose remains were found. Other than the geographic locations and time frame, no other connection has been discovered that tie these cases to one another, although some have speculated that a serial killer may be responsible for these strange disappearances. Some blame the Native American curse, or simply claim that the paranormal is to blame, as there appears to be an active portal here into the unexplained.
I've been separated from my group. It's been a couple of hours now, I think. I'm not sure. I was trying to find my way out, and I can't. But I'm going to stay here. I don't think that I went too far. I'm not sure that I don't know the name of the cave. Our last entry point was somewhere near Tulum Guantanamo, Mexico. If someone can notify the police or the authorities, or someone can help, I'm going to stay here. I have water and some food. I'm going to stay here.
Hello, friends. Steve Stockton here with you. Now, for some, a walk in the wilderness can be the perfect getaway from everyday life and a chance to reconnect with Mother Nature. For others, the great outdoors can be a dangerous place, and unfortunately, is a place where many people meet their end or just mysteriously vanish. Here are cases for you to consider. Randy Rasco. On November 19, 2015, park rangers at the Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky noticed that a car had been sitting in the car park for around 2 weeks. This immediately set off warning bells, and after doing some digging for information, they discovered that the car belonged to 40-year-old Randy Rasco. As the car had been there for quite some time, the park rangers set about searching for Randy right away. But when he couldn't be found in or near the parking area, they opened an investigation and widened their search. Park rangers and investigators contacted Randy's family to see if they had spoken to him, but chillingly, they had been out of contact for a few months. According to his sister Sherry, up until May 2015, everything was normal. On a regular basis, he was doing his normal things, hunting, fishing, and kept in contact with our brother who lived close to his Bowling Green apartment. Then one day out of the blue, he packed up his belongings, quit his job, and had his mail forwarded to another address, and just left. Sherry said they filed a missing persons report after they found out he had just fled, and were worried as he had recently gotten divorced. For a month, the Rasco family waited for any news, and in June, he was found safe and sound in Washington state. Randy made it clear that he didn't want to speak to his family at that time and wanted to be alone. As painful as it was, his family respected his boundaries and assured him they would welcome him back with open arms whenever he was ready. For the next few months, it's believed that Randy traveled all around the U.S., all while maintaining his privacy and secrecy. His family didn't know that anything was wrong until the Mammoth Cave National Park Rangers contacted them to let them know that his car had been found abandoned. With this second disappearance, his family hoped that there would be a positive resolution. But sadly, Randy Rasco is still missing. Search crews, volunteers, and even the Civil Air Patrol all joined in on the search for Randy, scouring the over 53,000 acres of land in the park. Despite their best efforts and multiple searches, no sign of Randy has ever been found, and his car is the only clue we have in terms of his mysterious disappearance. Randy Rasco is described as a white male, 6 foot 2 inches tall, with black hair, hazel eyes, and a slim, athletic build. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the Mammoth Cave National Park at 270-758-2180. Katherine Van Alst. 8-year-old Katherine Van Alst disappeared from Devil's Den State Park near Arkansas's Ozark National Forest when she and her family were camping. Katherine apparently was playing with her brothers when she wandered off and got lost. What makes Katherine's disappearance remarkable is she was found 6 days later. When found, she was wandering the woods and was eerily calm. University of Arkansas student Porter Chadwick was part of the search party that found Katherine. He told the Pittsburgh Press that when he found her, she walked stoically out of a cave and just said, "Here I am." Many other hikers have gotten lost in that part of the Ozarks and haven't been as lucky as Katherine. A grown woman was lost there for 17 days and died just 50 yards from the road. How did Katherine survive in the woods for 6 days? Did someone take her, only to return her 6 days later? Or is there an explanation to this story that we simply can't comprehend? Either way, someone or something might just be lurking in Devil's Den. Kenny Veach. 47-year-old Kenny Veach mysteriously disappeared in the Mojave Desert in Nevada on November 14, 2014. Kenny was hiking near Area 51 and was looking for cave systems and mine shafts. Kenny has uploaded several videos to his YouTube channel under the username SnakeBitMcGee, where he describes entering a cave with an M-shaped opening. He wrote in one comment, "That ain't nothing. I'm a long-distance hiker. One time during one of my hikes out by Nellis Air Force Base, I found a hidden cave. The entrance to the cave was shaped like a perfect capital M. I always enter every cave I find, but as I began to enter this particular cave, my whole body began to vibrate. Suddenly, I became very scared and hightailed it out of there. That was one of the strangest things that ever happened to me." Now, these videos gained popularity following his mysterious disappearance, and in these videos, he does indeed talk about how his whole body vibrated and he felt scared upon entering this mysterious M cave. Armed with a gun and a camera this time, Kenny headed back out to the M cave on November 10th, 2014, hoping to get a better look inside. However, Kenny never returned home. Although he was a very experienced hiker and outdoorsman, Kenny rarely took a map or GPS device with him on his hikes. According to his family, on the day of his disappearance, he told them that he would only be gone for a short overnight trip, but then when he didn't return home, they immediately called the police. Police, volunteers, and search and rescue teams all scoured the area where Kenny was last known to have been, and on November 22nd, 2014, volunteers found Kenny's phone. According to those volunteers, the trail went cold soon after they located his phone, and there have been no signs of Kenny ever since. At the time of this episode, the mysterious disappearance of Kenny Veach is very much alive in true crime and paranormal circles, but it appears that we are still no closer to uncovering the truth. Devil's Hole and the tragic disappearance of two teens in 1965. Now, there's just something about a place with the name Devil in its title that piques the curiosity of some people. There are countless locations all over the world which have this particular word in their name. Not only devil either, there are many other words that symbolize or mean devil or evil or some other form of something not very good or beautiful, given, somewhat ironically, to some of the world's most breathtaking and wondrous places. Sometimes the location will have gotten its name innocently enough, such as because the geology of the place simply looks foreboding and sinister, especially under the cover of night. Much of the time, these particular places are said to be cursed, enchanted, or downright evil, and the spooky and scary landscape only lends credence to these rumors and legends. So much of the time, though, these places with this particular word in the title are associated with not just devils, demons, spirits, and other otherworldly phenomena, but with real tragedies, disappearances, deaths, maybe bizarre sounds and strange lights in the sky. Today, though, we're going to focus on one place in particular, where a mysterious tragedy struck. Devil's Hole, which is located in the aptly named Death Valley National Park in California, United States. This portion of the Mojave Desert, contained in Death Valley National Park, is the driest and hottest place in the United States. Near Badwater, in the long trench of the desert between the Panamint Range on the west and the Black Mountains on the east, is the lowest dry land in the Western Hemisphere, an amazing 282 feet below sea level. A veritable showcase of desert extremes, Death Valley National Park includes one of the largest salt pans on Earth, dramatically faulted landscapes, young volcanic craters, and massive dune fields. Today, we're going all the way back to the year 1965. Death Valley was very different from the Los Angeles of the time, where there were uprisings happening all over the place and all of it being shown live on the evening news. Death Valley, California, was in one of the least populated parts of the state at the time, and a whole different world from the more largely inhabited cities which surrounded it. On June 20th, 1965, 4 high school buddies set out to a remote desert location about 90 miles northwest of Las Vegas. Their intent was to joy dive into a deep geothermal abyss called Devil's Hole. Sadly, 2 of the young men would never re-emerge from this mysterious fossil water portal. Arriving at their destination, the foursome hiked up a hot, barren hillside, which overlooked a large-scale ranching operation that would nearly erase a much smaller and nearly ancient complex called Ash Meadows within a few short years. A well-trampled trail led to the entrance of a limestone chasm that had allegedly opened a whopping 60,000 years ago, after possibly some seismic event caused the roof of the cave to collapse in on itself. The foursome of boys, which was made up of Paul Gianconteri, a 19-year-old cafeteria worker at the nearby Nevada test site, his new brother-in-law, 20-year-old David Rose, who was a Las Vegas casino parking attendant, were with their other friend, 19-year-old Bill Alter, and his younger brother Jack. Boys scrambled under a fenced enclosure posted with warning signs, and thinking they were immune to any trouble these warning signs might be posted about, they proceeded to descend the 30 or so feet down to a ledge, where the faint but flitting movement of tiny blue-gray pupfish could be observed swimming in the 8 by 60-foot pool. That is, if any of the four young men had bothered to look just a bit closer at what they were about to jump into. After suiting up with scuba tanks, masks, and dive lights, Paul, David, and Bill dove into the claustrophobic waters. The temperature was nearly indistinguishable from that of their skin. Upon entering the pool, the boys most likely disturbed the delicate algae spawning mats where the entire population of the exceedingly rare Cyprinodon diabolus continues to prosper and breed exclusively. Jack was the only one who hadn't jumped in, as he was delegated the one who would remain stationed on the ledge in case anything went wrong. Sometime after midnight, Paul failed to resurface, so David and Bill quickly redove into the waters in a vain attempt to locate their missing friend. Bill Alter frantically followed David Rose down to approximately 170 feet until David, too, disappeared into the darkness. The bodies of the brothers-in-law were never recovered. Many people believed back then, and still do believe, that these young men were inspired to go diving at night despite the dangers in this specific place because of a newspaper article from the year before, which detailed a speleological research expedition of a massive underground lake below Death Valley, led by California-based professional diver Jim Houtz, who would ironically dive numerous times around the clock with military personnel and other volunteer divers in their attempt to locate the missing men for 36 whole hours until the search was eventually called off. The only traces left of the two brother-in-laws? A mask and a snorkel. There was also a flashlight tied to a ledge some 100 feet below. It seemed to signal, ineffectively, the way out of the otherworldly underwater cave system. Articles detailing the unsuccessful rescue effort were published nationwide. In the Sarasota Journal, dated June 22, 1965, Houtz stated that he had previously dived in Devil's Hole around 300 times over 28 trips, further commenting, "It's beautiful in there. It goes straight down 160 feet, like a pipe, then opens into a room that is about 300 feet long and maybe 40 feet wide. The bottom of the room is about 260 feet down, then it narrows into another tube. I dived to 315 feet. Maybe that's a record, I don't know. But at the end of the tube, it opens again into something else. We don't know what the next room is, or if it's a room at all. It's like infinity." There are some very terrifying legends from the native tribes of the area about this particular place called Devil's Hole. The Timbasha told tales of water babies who would surface and swallow a swimmer or diver whole should they stay in the pool for too long. Other legends suggested that So-Apitzi, a legendary malevolent giant who dwelled at mountain springs and caves, would snatch and devour unwary victims. Myths withstanding, Barbara Durham, an elder of the Timbisha Shoshone who shared these stories at a 2002 workshop, admitted that she and her friends enjoyed how the pupfish tickled their toes when they played in the spring. Keep in mind here that the Devil's Hole pupfish, as they are specifically named, are considered by experts to be the rarest fish found anywhere on the planet. They were even the first ever species to be classified as endangered. The fish are not important to the story at all, really, but it seemed worth mentioning in order to reinforce how very special, and perhaps a bit magical, this place actually is. As far as the two young men who disappeared without a trace back in this mystical and extremely dangerous underwater cave system decades ago, well, they've never been found, and neither have any clues relating to what could have possibly happened to them. As for one more bit of interesting fact that could lend a bit of credence to something a bit more sinister being afoot, as the local tribes absolutely believe, at this otherwise serene and tranquil-looking water source. It's said that Charles Manson himself spent several days at Devil's Hole, trying to figure out a way to make it safely down into the chasm, with some saying he was convinced he would never have to come back up. Allegedly, he had an obsession with the place, and was convinced that there was an underwater portal to an alternate dimension, or more specifically, a portal to the underworld, where he felt he and his family would be able to safely wait out the coming apocalypse he so famously predicted would happen that never actually did. Charles Manson's problem lay in figuring out a way to drain the hole, and it seemed like he may have been given this idea by an alleged Indian legend that resurfaced during the 1920s, contending that a subterranean sect of leather-clad humanoids lived down within an eerily yellow-green lit abode somewhere in the Mojave Desert. Could this possibly be true? Just as with the case of these poor young men, just doing what young men do and looking for a night of perhaps irresponsible but never thought to be deadly fun, we may never actually know. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode. In this video, we bring you 15 strange disappearances from Yosemite National Park in California. Yosemite is America's second most visited national park, receiving 4 to 5 million visitors per year, behind only the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which averages around 12 million visitors per year. Yosemite is a glorious wilderness, best known for its waterfalls, but within its nearly 1,200 square miles, you can find deep valleys, grand meadows, ancient giant sequoias, and so much more. People come here to hike, to climb, to just enjoy nature. However, there is a dark side to Yosemite. On average, Yosemite has the highest number of reported missing persons of any national park, with about 40 per year, or 1 for every 100,000 visitors. Here are just a few of what we consider to be the strangest disappearances. Peter Jackson. 74-year-old Peter Jackson is believed to have gone for a day hike from his campsite at White Wolf Campground, but he never returned. He had sent a text message to his son saying that he was on his way to the park on September 17, 2016. His vehicle was found at the campground, and camping fees were paid through September 21st of that year. An extensive search of the park, involving helicopters, dogs, and dozens of volunteers, turned up no indication of Peter's whereabouts. On October 2nd, 2016, the search for Peter was placed in continuous limited mode. In August of 2019, Peter's backpack was found in the Ackerson Meadow Aspen Valley area on the west side of Yosemite National Park. Other than that, Peter has not been seen or heard from since his disappearance, and his case remains unsolved. Walter H. Reinhardt. 66-year-old Walter Reinhardt went missing on September 19, 2002. His car was found at White Wolf Trailhead, suggesting to investigators he went for a hike. It is not known what he was wearing, although he often hiked with a large fanny pack. An extensive search of the park, involving helicopters, dogs, and dozens of volunteers, turned up no indication of Walter's whereabouts. Walter has not been seen or heard from since his disappearance, and his case remains unsolved. Ruth Ann Rupert. 49-year-old Ruth Ann Rupert was last seen in the Curry Village area, or the Yosemite Medical Clinic, at about noon on Monday, August 14, 2000. She was scheduled to go on a backpacking trip in the park, but had to postpone the trip due to an infection. She is believed to have gone on a day hike from Yosemite Falls to the Foresta area, based on witnesses' observations. An extensive search of the park, involving helicopters, dogs, and dozens of volunteers, turned up no indication of Ruth Ann's whereabouts. 8 years later, in 2008, Ruth Ann's backpack was found in the Fireplace Creek drainage, an area consistent with the hiking route from Yosemite Falls to Foresta. Ruth Ann has not been seen or heard from since her disappearance, and her case remains unsolved. Kieran Burke. 45-year-old Kieran Burke was visiting from Dublin, Ireland, on a hiking trip in April of 2000. He was discovered missing on April 6, 2000, when park staff noticed he hadn't checked out of his lodging. He was last seen the day before at Curry Village, possibly on his way to hike alone. His family said he was an experienced hiker. However, an extensive search of the park involving helicopters, dogs, and dozens of volunteers turned up no indication of Kieran's whereabouts. Kieran has not been seen or heard from since his disappearance, and his case remains unsolved. David Paul Morrison. 28-year-old David Paul Morrison was last seen in Little Yosemite Valley in Yosemite National Park at 7:15 a.m. on May 25, 1998. He disappeared while hiking to Half Dome and has never been heard from again. Although David was considered an experienced hiker, he wasn't equipped for an overnight trip at the time of his disappearance. Neither was he dressed for the cold and wet weather. An extensive search of the park, including helicopters, dogs, and dozens of volunteers, turned up no indication of David's whereabouts. David has not been seen or heard from since his disappearance, and his case remains unsolved. Timothy John Barnes. 25-year-old Timothy Barnes was a resident of Cucamonga, California in 1988. He left Tenaya Lakes near Highway 120 east of Tioga Road in California at approximately 9 a.m. on July 5, 1988. Timothy planned to hike from the Murphy Creek Trailhead to Poly Dome Lakes in Yosemite National Park, which is located approximately 3 miles from Tenaya Lakes. He was supposed to return by 4:30 p.m., but never showed up and has never been seen or heard from again. Timothy's friends report him as a missing person to Park Service Rangers the following morning. An extensive search of the area failed to produce any evidence as to his whereabouts, and Timothy was declared legally dead on July 19, 1990, 2 years after his disappearance. His remains have never been found. Stacy Ann Arras. 14-year-old Stacy Arras was last seen while visiting Yosemite National Park with her father and 6 others on July 27, 1981. The group reached a cluster of cabins designed for overnight stay at Sunrise High Sierra Camp, tied up their horses, and went indoors to freshen up. Stacy changed clothes and left the cabin, carrying her camera so she could photograph the lake. Stacy invited her father to join her, but he declined, and an elderly man from the group went with her instead. They went downhill towards the lake, and the rest of the group watched them from above. They saw Stacy's companions sit down. Stacy walked further on towards the lake, then went behind some trees and disappeared from sight. After a few minutes, when she didn't return, the other members of the group went to look for her. An extensive search of the park involving helicopters, dogs, and dozens of volunteers turned up no indication of Stacy's whereabouts. The only trace ever found of her was the lens cap from her camera around the tree line area where she was last seen. Stacy has not been seen or heard from since her disappearance, and her case remains unsolved. Dekran Nadjan. 20-year-old Dekran Nadjan was last seen at Camp Curry Village in Yosemite National Park in California on July 24, 1972. He asked the registration desk attendant how to get to Half Dome and has never been seen or heard from again. At the time of his disappearance, he was a medical student at Cambridge University in England. He was vacationing in the U.S. with plans to visit Florida after his stay at Yosemite. An extensive search of the park involving dogs, helicopters, and dozens of volunteers turned up no trace of Dekran's whereabouts. He has not been seen or heard from since his disappearance, and his case remains unsolved. Matthew Green. 39-year-old Matthew Green was last heard from on July 16, 2013, when he called his parents and an automotive repair shop to check on progress and exchange text messages with friends. Matthew was a high school mathematics teacher in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, and lived in Bethlehem, and was a very experienced hiker and outdoorsman. Matthew arrived in the area of the eastern Sierra Mountains in Yosemite National Park on June 27, 2013, to climb with friends. But when his Subaru car broke down, they continued on while he stayed behind at a campground called Shady Rest near Mammoth Lake to wait for repairs. The last contact was on July 16, when he called his parents and the car repair shop to check on progress and exchange text messages with some of his friends. At the campsite, authorities found some of his gear missing and a guidebook with pages torn out of it. Friends said he often tore out the pages for hikes he wanted to go on, and when he completed them, he would put them back in his book. In this case, the pages were from the Minaret area, including Mount Ritter and Mount Banner, but Green didn't sign his name on either summit's log. His friends returned to the campsite on July 17th, and he was nowhere to be seen. They had discovered that his car had been repaired, but he never picked it up, and he hadn't returned to the Shady Rest campground for over a week. The Mammoth Lake Police Department was informed. Several of Matthew's friends flew to California and canvassed bus drivers, store owners, librarians, and others in Mammoth Lakes, posted flyers at trailheads, checked summit registers, and spent several days in the backcountry looking for clues. The search has gone airborne, too, with a helicopter flying over the rugged terrain and one of Green's friends shooting high-resolution video from a private plane. California search and rescue personnel have also volunteered their time. Despite this extensive search, no trace of Matthew was found. Michael Fickery. 51-year-old Michael Fickery was reported missing when he did not return home from a 4-day hike. On June 15, 2005, Michael, an avid, experienced hiker and backpacker, visited the north side of the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir in Yosemite National Park for a solo hike. He had planned this hike to take him to Rancheria Falls, Telltale Mountain, Lake Vernon, and then through Beehive before returning back to the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. At some point during the day, he decided to begin walking to the north up to the Pacific Crest Trail towards Telltale Mountain. His family became concerned when he did not return by June 19th, 4 days after Mike went on his hike and when his wilderness permit expired. On June 21st, they called the Park Service and an intensive search of the area around the reservoir and Pacific Crest Trail was launched. However, all that was found was a backpack near Telltale Mountain, just off the trail, containing a topographical map, a camera, and a bottle of water. The search and rescue operation involved personnel from 5 counties with aircraft and tracker dogs. Apart from the pack, nothing else was found. Nearly 15 years later, Michael remains missing. George Pinka. 30-year-old George Pinka disappeared on July 17, 2011, while hiking at the Upper Yosemite Falls in Yosemite National Park. George was from Hawthorne, California, and was visiting the national park with his church group of 80 people, of which around 20 people were walking the Upper Yosemite Fall Trail that day. The group separated at the top, with the hikers going back down at their own pace. George likely fell behind the main group. George's friends assumed he had hiked back to the Yosemite Valley floor earlier and didn't report him missing until 9 p.m. George completely vanished off the trail. He was last seen wearing gray sweatpants with white stripes, a black t-shirt that says D&B across the chest, or a black tank top and gray-blue running shoes. He was carrying a blue cloth bag and some limited food and water. Initial search efforts began that same evening, and a full-scale search and rescue operation was initiated on Saturday morning, June 18th. Around 105 search and rescue personnel from around the state were deployed, along with helicopters and 6 search dogs, including Yosemite National Park Search and Rescue, Inyo County, Mono County, Mariposa County, Marin County, Fresno County, Tuolumne County, China Lake, Los Angeles County, Nevada County, Sierra Madre, Yosemite Search and Rescue dog teams, Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks, and California Explorer Search and Rescue. On June 23, 2011, search efforts transitioned to a limited continuous search. After nearly 1 week of extensive searching, park rangers did not find any clues as to George's whereabouts. In nearly 9 years since George vanished, none of his belongings have turned up, and George remains missing. Joel Thomason. 31-year-old Joel Thomason went on a solo hike in Yosemite National Park, telling friends of his plans to hike from Hetch Hetchy to then fish in Lake Elsinore and then return to Hetch Hetchy. He began on the 6th of September 2021 and was due back on the 9th. Joel is described as a white male standing 5 feet 10 inches tall with hazel eyes and brown hair worn buzzed short. Park officials noted that he may have decided to stay out longer and extend his trip to Cherry Lake to the north or east as far as the Grand Canyon of the Tuolumne River. Park officials are asking all wilderness travels north of Tioga Road and between Cherry Lake and Tuolumne Meadows to report possible sightings of him or any unattended or possibly abandoned equipment. They added that he was likely carrying the kayak packed in a large red pouch attached to the exterior of his backpack. His family provided this list of additional equipment he may have had with him, which includes a floppy boonie hat, a dark blue or gray hammock, large yellowish tan keddy pack, U.S. Army steel cup dated 1918, camelback type red and black day pack, a black and yellow collapsible sink, a bright red inflatable kayak, a small collapsible stove in a black bag, a kayak paddle, a Petzl Zipka headlamp, a yellow bear can, a Garmin Tactics Delta Solar GPS watch, a bright green mummy-style sleeping bag, and a fishing pole with other fishing gear. He was wearing tan or blue zip-off pants. Richard Judd. Richard and a still unidentified hiking partner were camped near Lower Merced Pass Lake when they went on a day hike towards Lower Ottawa Lake and Red Peak Pass on Sunday, according to the National Park Service and the Madera County Sheriff's Office. They got separated from each other somewhere between Lower Merced Pass Lake and Lower Ottawa Lake. Lower Merced Pass Lake is about 15 miles from Happy Isle, the trailhead where people can start the Mist Trail and hike to the Half Dome Cables. The hike from Lower Merced Pass Lake to Red Peak Pass is about 3.5 miles. A vehicle belonging to Judd or his hiking partner was parked at the Quartz Mountain Trailhead in the Sierra National Forest and outside Yosemite National Park, about 23 miles south of Lower Merced Pass Lake. Authorities described Richard as being 5 feet 11 inches tall, 150 pounds, with brown eyes, short gray hair, and a beard. He was last seen wearing a blue shirt and gray or blue pants. His last known location was in the Yosemite backcountry, about 15 miles from the popular trailhead junction at Happy Isle on the Merced River. Ralph Elliott. 51-year-old Ralph Elliott was last seen on April 22, 2021, after he left for a day hike in Yosemite National Park, California. Sadly, there's very little information about Ralph's case, but his story is still important, and it is important that we keep his case alive. According to the Fresno Bee newspaper, Ralph was intending to hike to the Yosemite Fall Overlook and Eagle Peak in the Yosemite National Park. Authorities are concerned for his well-being, and the Park Service are noted as saying that they believe he may be in a state of emotional distress and capable of harming himself. The Yosemite Park Service has declined to comment on why they believe that Ralph is in such a state of emotional distress, but they have asked anyone who comes into contact with him to bear this in mind. Ralph Elliott is described as a white male with a muscular build, 5 foot 8 inches tall, with blue eyes, a beard, and long graying hair. Sandra Johnson Hughes. 54-year-old Sandra Johnson Hughes of California was last heard from on June 26, 2020. Sandra had embarked on a solo camping trip in the Sierra, south of Yosemite, to escape from the current pandemic. Sandra had recently moved from Maui, Hawaii to California in June of 2020. She had trained to be a park ranger in college and was experienced in the outdoors. On July 5th of that year, the Madera County Sheriff's Office asked for the public's help in locating Sandra after they found her campsite near the Johnson's Meadow section of the forest in disarray. On that same day, the authorities located Hughes' silver Saab in Chiquito Creek to the north of the campsite. They said it appeared to have crashed into a tree at a speed of less than 20 miles per hour before rolling into the ravine. Hikers reported seeing Sandra on July 4, 2020, and said she was barefoot and had a bruise on her face. They offered to help her, but she declined medical assistance. Officers and volunteer search and rescue teams from more than half a dozen other sheriff's departments, together with dog teams, the California Highway Patrol, and the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, combed the forest on foot, while helicopters from California Air National Guard did an aerial search. The search focused around the area where a car was found, but there was no sign of Sandra. Then on August 9, 2020, two hunters saw a woman leaning against a tree along Road 5S01 near Beasore Road. She did not wave them down, attempt contact, or appear to be in any distress. Upon returning, they recognized her from a missing persons flyer and contacted park rangers. The hunters said that she appears to be visibly thinner than her last known photos. At the time of her disappearance, Sandra was a 54-year-old white female with blue shoulder-length hair. Her natural color is brown. She has brown eyes, is approximately 5 foot 3 inches tall, and weighs about 150 pounds. The search for Sandra was ongoing but limited. Now, flash forward to almost exactly 1 year later. This strange update to the case comes from the Madera County Sheriff's Office in Madera, California. It seems that a family from nearby Coarse Gold, California, experienced a bizarre broad daylight ghost sighting in the Madera County Mountains on Wednesday, July 21st, 2021. The event was so strange and disturbing that the Madera County Sheriff's Office felt the need to further investigate. It seems that a man named Jake Gorba, his wife Victoria, and their 3 children decided to take their 4-wheeler up to the Shut-Eye Peak on that fateful Wednesday. While on this family outing, they stopped to have something to eat beside the trail, and that's when things started to get strange. The couple's 3-year-old son, Caden, suddenly began animatedly talking to someone nearby. He was just in our 4-wheeler, and he was pointing out to a certain spot in the meadow, said his mom, Victoria. The normally reserved and somewhat quiet Caden excitedly told his parents that there in the meadow by where the family was having lunch was a woman lying face down with her legs straight up in the air. Furthermore, Caden stated that the woman was unable to speak or move and needed help. He began pleading with his parents to help this poor woman. He flat out told us, "Mom, she's already dead, but she needs our help." And that's when I got the goosebumps. I was like, "Oh my gosh," Victoria said. He goes, "Yeah, there's a lady over in the meadow in a black shirt, blue jeans, and blue hair." And I got goosebumps, said Victoria. He says, "She needs our help, but she's dead and she's lying face down with her legs up. She can't talk to me, but she's over there. We need to go help her." So, in order to calm young Caden down, Jake and Victoria walked over and checked out the meadow, but saw absolutely nothing. Caden continued to insist. He kept saying, trust me, Mom." And I was like, I trust you. I believe you 100%, said Victoria. Whatever young Caden was experiencing so unnerved and spooked the rest of the family that the other members of the family all unanimously agreed it's time to put an early end to their day of adventure and make the 35-mile drive back home to Coarse Gold. After arriving home, the event still fresh in her mind, Victoria decided to post about the weird encounter on her Facebook profile. We put it on Facebook to see if anybody knew anything about this area, and come to find out, there was a lady missing with a description that he described to us within a 5-mile radius of where we were, said Victoria. Now, as viewers of this channel know from our previous episode number 7, Sandra Hughes had gone missing in that area in June of 2020. The encounter became even more chilling when, according to Victoria, 3-year-old Caden's highly detailed description of the woman he had seen in the meadow was identical to the description of Sandra Hughes as given by the local authorities. He was very adamant that we needed to help her, and he described her down to blue hair. He said she has a black shirt, blue jeans, and blue hair, Mom. That's the exact description of her when she went missing, said Victoria. Then Victoria went and searched online for Sandra Hughes and found some photographs that had been released as a part of the search effort the year prior. Victoria said she got goosebumps when Caden readily recognized 3 of the photos of Sandra, identifying her as the woman he had seen in the field. As fate would have it, Madera County Sheriff Corporal Chris Williams just happened to see the Facebook post and found it intriguing, to say the least. So much so that he contacted Caden's family to further investigate the chilling account. Victoria said the corporal in charge of her case actually reached out to us on Facebook and was like, "Hey, we want more information and we want to bring you guys back up there and see if you could point us in the right direction." Corporal Williams has been investigating the disappearance of Sandra Hughes since the beginning of the investigation. On the following Thursday, 2 Madera County Sheriff's deputies ventured back up to the meadow to investigate, with Jake and Caden coming along to point them in the right direction. Unfortunately, the deputies found nothing new by way of evidence, although the case remains open. If she was possibly a ghost looking for some help, I hope that he could have at least helped and maybe helped the family find her, because it's been a long time apparently since she's been gone, Victoria said. The 4-wheeler that Caden and his family used while traveling in the mountains has now been nicknamed the Ghost Runner, and incidentally is also for sale. It's not believed that the spooky encounter is the reason they put the vehicle up for sale, as the family says they will continue to go adventuring in the Madera Mountains, but do admit there are a few spots now which they aren't anxious to visit again anytime soon, if at all. Local news reporters in the area reached out to the Madera County Sheriff's Office, who did confirm that they received a report of a possible sighting of some sort, and they did go out to the location to search for any additional leads or information. Well, there you have it. What do you think of these strange disappearances? Thank you for listening, and we look forward to your comments. But please, keep it friendly and respectful. I'll see you a little farther on down the trail. This is Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time